Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and it's my great pleasure to be speaking to Professor Steve Redhead. And we're speaking on a Sunday morning at the University of Bolton just before our induction, but it's been a rather remarkable week for many reasons, and one of those reasons is finally the release of a remarkable and important report about the Hillsborough disaster. And notice I didn't say the Hillsborough accident there. So I thought we'd talk to Steve about the nature of this report and why it is so significant. So good morning, Steve. It's Sunday morning in Bolton.
Good morning.
And let's talk about what happened this week and the release of this report and why it does matter.
I agree with you. I think it is a significant watershed in the whole sorry saga of Hillsborough. 23 years ago. It's an incredible time for justice to have even started to be seen to be done. It was the report of an independent panel which was set up a couple of years ago, and it featured an academic, Professor Phil Scraton, who's now at Queen's University Belfast but was at Edge Hill for a long time, doing similar work around inquests and around criminal justice and the political aspects of criminal justice. And I think one of the things that Phil was able to inject into this report, he wrote the majority of it, was a complete context for what he'd previously written in his book Hillsborough, The Truth, now into a third edition, which was really an uncovering of an unholy alliance of government, media and police, which effectively covered up what really happened at Hillsborough in April 1989.
And could I stop you there? For people who maybe don't know Hillsborough, why are we using that word? What actually happened that day?
Hillsborough is Sheffield Wednesday's ground, and in those days, FA Cup semi-finals were not played at Wembley. They were actually at neutral grounds, and Sheffield Wednesday in the north of England was a useful neutral ground. Sheffield Wednesday didn't get to semi-finals very often, but clubs from the north of England and indeed the Midlands were able to play very often at Hillsborough in the FA Cup semi-finals, so fans didn't have to travel that far. In this case, in April 1989, Nottingham Forest had defeated Manchester United in the quarter-finals, so ironically it could have been Manchester United and Liverpool at Hillsborough. Nottingham Forest and Liverpool met in the FA Cup semi-final, and the big cop at Sheffield Wednesday's ground, Hillsborough, was allocated to the Nottingham Forest fans. Away fans, both teams were away fans because it was neutral ground. The Leppings Lane end of the ground was allocated to Liverpool fans, and there was seats above the terraces, but relatively small pens, fenced in by huge fences, which were the result of the Labour government's Safety of Sports Ground Act in 1975. There've been huge fences to stop pitch invasions, to supposedly stop hooliganism at football grounds in England for a long time. So that's the context. And what happened was that there was a huge milling of Liverpool fans outside the Leppings Lane end of the ground on that afternoon. There wasn't the usual sifting of people's tickets, and the police crowd control, from what you can see of the pictures of the time, actually was pretty much out of control at a very early stage, maybe even an hour before kick-off. Eventually what happened was that shortly before kick-off at 3 o'clock, the police match commander allowed a gate to be opened in order to allow fans who are in danger of being crushed on the outside to get into the ground. There was no proper policing of the numbers going into the pens because of the opening of the door, opening of the gate, and a crush ensued which actually killed 96 people as the game was going on. And 700 were injured. It was a huge disaster in many ways. Many more people could have been killed. In some ways it's a miracle that more people weren't killed. I know that's perhaps a strange thing to say. And at the time, literally, as people were listening on the radio to the unfolding disaster, the media allowed the idea of Liverpool hooligans had caused this to be the story of the day. And that was fed to them by the police. Police actually gave them false information to the media. At the time, the cover-up, if you like, started right at the beginning, and it's gone on for 23 years.
So that's the context of it. So what made Phil's work that was released this week and the work of the panel so important in relation to that narrative that you've just told? What happened this week that hasn't happened in the last 23 years?
Yeah, much of the information that is in the long report by the independent panel had actually been produced in the 23 years. For example, if you read Hillsborough, The Truth by Phil Scraton, there's a lot of information about police doctoring of their statements. There was a lot of, as we know now, probably 164 statements were doctored in order to show, to try and prove that Liverpool fans were the architects of their own deaths. But actually, there was a lot of information in the public domain, partly as a result of researchers like Scraton. But actually what the independent panel report does is put it all into context. There's new medical information which suggests that 41 people of the 96 were still alive after 3:15, the arbitrary cut-off for the inquest. But actually, the original inquest, which reported accidental death, which is, in my view, absolutely absurd. What now is likely to happen as a result of that independent panel report, which has put everything into context and indeed provided new information, is that a head of steam is now building up to persuade the Attorney General of the present coalition government to go to the High Court and ask for the original inquest verdict, accidental death, to be quashed and a series of new inquests to be set up for the 96 who died. And I think there is a political pressure now as a result of this independent panel's report and the huge media interest that will, in my view, be unstoppable. So I suspect that there will be a new inquest and that the justice which the families of the 96 have wanted for so long will actually seem to be seen to be done and actually be done.
Final question, and this is about research methods, interestingly enough. So, no, it seems like a bizarre question, but so much of what has occurred in research methods in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years has been about quantitative methods, doing surveys, and yet what makes this report so outstanding from my perspective is it's the greatest example of unobtrusive research methods that I've ever seen. So in other words, this panel simply went through 400,000 pages, is it, of documents and reread them, read against the grain, if you will, or reread them in light of new information. So have you got any final comment to make about the role of unobtrusive research methods, not conducting any more interviews, not conducting surveys, and yet the use of documents in creating the great report that we have?
Yeah, I think the research methods question is of great interest. The panel certainly did. They actually were looking at 450,000 documents, wow. So many more pages than that. But what researchers like Phil Scraton had done for a long time, and as part of this independent panel report he continued to do it, was to actually get the material that was around. That's the idea of unobtrusive research methods. And cross-check it. One of the things he was very, very good at, if you look at Hillsborough, The Truth, was that he was able to cross-check lots of different documents and reports and minutes of meetings and so on, and find the holes in the official story. It's a really salutary lesson for academics and for independent researchers. He did a great job. Hillsborough, The Truth is a very, very good example of that. But I think the whole independent panel report is also able to do that because it's doing it from a medical point of view, from a legal point of view, from a criminological point of view. And it's actually, I think, finding the gaps in the official story, and then suddenly the official story falls apart. And that's really what's happened over the 23 years.
Thanks, Steve. Such an interesting conversation and, of course, unfolding literally as we speak.